seventh graders. Morning here. As usual, it could be whenever you're watching this. I don't know. Not my problem. Not my business. But I am going to start, hopefully by the end of this chapter, doing these live in second hour in class for a couple of reasons. Number one is to give you the ability to feel like you're back in school, and so you can see the people that you're at school with, at least half their faces. Now, YouTube, when I do it live, it will upload the video later on, just like as a normal video. And so it's not necessary that you would have to be here during second hour, because some of you aren't in second hour. And that's what I'm not going to do it every single hour. So you could watch it later. Also, for selfish reasons, it'll keep me from having to do this. Do it twice. Well, really four times, because I'm already doing it three times during the day and doing it a fourth time on my prep. But we'll see. So I've got a lot of questions, mostly from seventh graders. I think most of you know what's going on. But yes, you do need to be writing these notes down. I've had questions from students and parents regarding that. Yeah, just like your notebook check last year, you've got to write the notes down. And on a Tuesday or Thursday after school in October, right before fall break, I'm going to collect these and grade them just like I normally would. So you need to be writing these down because it's a 100-point grade. So if you haven't been writing these down, the bad news is you got to write them all down now, and you need to keep them in order, as I've said on the other videos. The good news is you do have time, so I'm not going to be able to tell when you wrote it. So if you're behind a section or two, or even a chapter or two, you can make up for it. But make sure you're writing these down. There will be an attendance question today. I'll probably throw it in randomly somewhere in the middle. I don't want to do them at the beginning or at the end to get people to fast forward to the part where they know I'm going to ask the question. So I'm just going to do that whenever. The notes are not the notes, the test questions from yesterday. We read chapter 2, section 1, as you can see right there on the screen. We read that yesterday. I'm taking your study guides this time. I'm going to take them for a grade. A lot of you turned them in. A few of you reached out to me and said you didn't know they were due at 3 p.m. Yesterday. And I didn't either, to be honest. I just put it on there as a deadline on accident. I meant to put it on there at 11:59, in other words, midnight last night. So if you handed it in yesterday after 3, that's not a big deal. The in-person students, I'm collecting those from them the day of the test. So in reality, even if you haven't turned it in, even by now, you could turn it in today or tomorrow. Just mark it as done and make sure you've attached your questions to there. It should make your own copy. All you have to do is type them in on your device and turn those in. And so, like I said, don't sweat if you haven't done those yet. I'm not marking off yet for a lay grade until we get to test time, which this chapter has 5 sections. So it'll be a while, mid-September at least. Okay. So if you have any questions about notebooks or work that you should have been handing in or should be handing in soon, send me a message in Google Classroom or email, remind, whatever, and I'm happy to help you out with that. So with that said, let's get into chapter 2, which is the actual Civil War itself, which you probably were able to figure out from context clues from chapter 1. And so this is going to sound, like, duh, which states were in the north and which states were in the south is pretty easily divided. The northern states were in the north, and obviously. But if we had border states, which are, wait for it, it's pretty early. It's not even 8:30 here. So if you're watching this pretty soon, it's early in the morning to blow your mind. But they were on the border between north and south. That's why they were called the border states. And Abraham Lincoln himself was like, yo, if we lose even one of these 4 states, we might as well just give up the whole thing altogether. We might as well just say the South can be their own country, and we're not going to stop you, and we're not going to fight the war. And so Lincoln, for reasons that I'm going to go on here real quick. Yeah, we'll talk about this on the next slide, but for reasons that we'll talk about in just a second, Lincoln was like, hey, each of these states is so important. So there are reasons besides, like, hey, they're right there on the border, that each of these 4 states did not know right away if they were going to join the Union, or stay with the Union, I guess I should say, or join the Confederacy. They were, as I said, right on the border. Slavery was, as you know, in Missouri, legal in these 4 states. We talked about Missouri a lot last chapter. But none of these 4 states had many slaves. It was legal, but it wasn't really that big of a thing. Now, of course, as we always talk about, that's easy for me to say sitting here in 2020. But if you were one of the few slaves in most 4 states at that time, of course, it was a major thing, a major part of your life. But we've talked about the evils and just how bad slavery was a lot. And like I've said several times, it's not as bad as people say. It's worse than people say. And then, we have a lot of people nowadays that are trying to, smooth things over and be like, well, slavery wasn't that bad because we have this guilty conscience. First of all, you don't have to have that. You're 13 or 14, 12 years old. You weren't alive when slavery was alive, but not reckoning with our mistakes that we made in the past make us more likely to make those same mistakes in the future. And so the idea that recognizing how wrong slavery was and how bad it was and how evil it was that people back then committed to that, it does not prevent us from making America a better country now. It actually encourages us to do so because we can realize that there are still mistakes in our past that we need to try to rectify in some way and to avoid making them again, even if we're not going to try to change those now. So they each had certain ties to the North and the South. They were each close to major rivers or close to major cities. The book goes through these. Missouri, of course, is between Illinois, or I should say the Mississippi River is between here and Missouri. And so that's a huge port state for the Mississippi River. One of the biggest port cities in that era was St. Louis, of course. And so losing the ability to ship things up and specifically down the Mississippi River would be huge. Kentucky is the same with the Ohio River. The northern border between Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois is the Ohio River, and that's a major. Maryland was perhaps most important because it was very close to Richmond, Virginia, which is the Confederate capital, but also it surrounds Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not in Maryland. Don't get that mistaken, okay? But Maryland is surrounding it. Washington, D.C. is cut out in its own District of Columbia, which is what D.C. stands for. And it is not specifically in any state, but it's physically basically inside of Maryland. Maryland is like the donut, and Washington, D.C. is like the whole of the donut, okay? And then you had Delaware, and the book says Delaware was important because it's close to Philadelphia, but Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania. And we went on last year, and I was like, Delaware, yeah, 3 of the 4 states I can buy into, but saying that like, oh, we really need to get Delaware. Well, why? Well, because it's close to an important city. It's in another state. And I did this, chapter 2 last year, and I was like, I bet Delaware is pretty cool, and it's got a lot of cool, fun facts about it. And so I Googled it to try to, not roast Delaware for an entire hour one day. But when I Googled it, no, I was wrong. There's nothing really interesting at all about Delaware. Most of its fun facts about Delaware was like it used to have the largest pumpkin throwing, like they built pumpkin catapulting, contest in America, but they don't anymore. They canceled it for insurance reasons 3 years ago. And one time, a high school built in Delaware built the world's largest Lego tower, but another school broke their, and so like, well, it's our second smallest state. Like that's not even cool to be the smallest. So I'm sorry to say, I've tried researching cool fun facts about Delaware, but there's really nothing. Delaware is like pretty, lame. So I mean, I live in Heron. It's not like I live somewhere like, ooh, there's magical farts that smell like cinnamon buns or whatever. I can't smell anyway, but you get the idea. So long story short, Lincoln, through his leadership, was able to keep these 4 states in the Union. So both sides had certain advantages and disadvantages. The North had clearer advantages. To people looking from the outside, it was pretty certain to a lot of outside observers the North was going to win. First of all, we are in the North, Illinois in the North, had more people. And that, of course, if you're fighting a war, is a super important thing for reasons I don't think I have to explain. But it makes sense if, you kill one of their dudes and they kill one of your dudes, and it's 1 to 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 1. Eventually the side with more people is going to be standing victorious. Okay. We also had a factory-based economy, and the South had an agriculture or farming-based economy, which is fine when you're living your day-to-day life. But when it comes to fighting a war, and we've got a factory-based economy where we can produce ammunition, clothing, boots, guns, really, really, really quickly. Whereas the South is growing things. Um, it's not as useful. Of course, the main crop, as you probably know by this time in the South, is cotton. The invention of the cotton gin really exploded. We would have talked about this into the year, but really slavery was on the way down, and then the cotton gin was invented. It bounced way back up, and it was literally called King Cotton at this time in the South. And so cotton is great if you can, turn it into clothes and sell it and stuff. When you're fighting a war, you can't throw a cotton ball at somebody and you hit my eye, but that's not really an effective weapon in 1860s warfare. So yeah, cotton balls are great if you could sell them and buy stuff, but you can't. And why can't they just buy guns? Well, where were they buying them from? The North. The North is not really interested right now in the middle of war with the South and selling them guns. Like, hey, I'd like to buy some guns. Okay, what are you going to use it for? To shoot and kill you. Well, maybe you're not going to sell that person a gun. Okay, the South did have some advantages also. The book and I wrote down in the notes here, they had excellent military leadership. The more I read about that, the more I'm like, yeah, did they though? We'll talk about that later when we get into actual the battles of the war. Some of their excellent military leadership made some pretty dumb mistakes. Okay, they also were angrier, and that helps in a fight. If there's two guys of equal training, equal size on the playground about to fight, and one of them's like, whatever, the other guy's, just seething with rage, you usually would bet on the guy seething with rage. And the South is angrier because they don't want to have their racist institution of slavery taken away from them. But their biggest advantage, in my opinion, was that the war was, I shouldn't say their biggest, but the war was fought in the South. And so, of course, they know every cave, mountain, stream, whatever, forest, nook and cranny, hiding spot, or whatever. And so that's helpful to the South. But the main advantage the South had is here, their aims. They did not have to beat the North. They just had to be not beaten by the North, if that makes any sense. They were the South. They had the South. The North had to go take it back. They didn't have to go into the North and take anything from the North. It's easier to win the war when you're just trying to keep what you already have, as opposed to attacking and trying to take something that you don't. This is my mask, by the way, hanging from my ear. Looks weird. Looks like a bird beak when I have it on, but it doesn't go into my mouth when I talk. And that's why I picked this one. I bought a 5-pack. Anyway, so the North actually had to go into the South and take it back. And that's a more challenging process. In other words, if nothing happens, the South wins. And that's a big advantage to have in the war. All they have to do is not be beaten by the North. They don't have to actually go destroy the North. Whereas the North does have to do that with the South. Okay, so the North, these are their goals, what they hope to accomplish. These are not their strategies. Strategy is how you're going to accomplish your goal. In basketball, your goal is to score more points than the other team. Your strategies are, I'm going to play zone. We're going to give it to the tall kid to dunk or whatever. We're going to play a 2-1-2, or we're going to run motion offense, or we're going to have these certain inbound play. That's the strategies. The goal is to score more points. So these are their goals. They're not their strategies, but here are their strategies. The South, their big strategy was like, Britain and France are going to help us. The reason they thought Britain and France were going to help us because they bought cotton from the South. However, Britain and France were not really into that whole slavery thing. And so when it came time to, push came to shove, as they say, and Britain and France had to make a decision, like, are we going to help the South? They were like, well, we got rid of slavery 100, 150 years ago because we realized how bad it was. And I'm not sure that we are going to jump in and support these people. They were going to play defense, like I said on the last slide, try to hold as much territory as possible without attacking the North, with one exception, and that is to attack the American capital, Washington, D.C., which, as we discussed a few slides ago, is not only surrounded by Maryland. Basically, you have Virginia and then the Potomac River and then Maryland, and then Washington, D.C. is in that little area between them. And so Virginia and Maryland is the border, and that's right where the border between the North and the South is. That's right where Washington, D.C. is. So that's really their only exception, is like, hey, we're going to conquer the capital. Union strategies, on the other hand, were, as you can see here, they were going to blockade southern ports so they could not ship their stuff out. Like I said a few minutes ago, what they've got is cotton. And without exchanging that for other materials in wartime, cotton is not super useful. It's got thorns in it, but it's not going to fight a war with it. Okay. And they also wanted to institute something called the anaconda plan. An anaconda, of course, is a snake that surrounded its prey and squeezes in to strangle it. In the the North is planning to do that to the south by they're going to go straight down the Mississippi River, conquer all the major ports and cities on the way there, and split the Confederacy in two. So if they've got the blockade on the outside and they've got the Mississippi River, basically they've got two areas of the South separated, and they've got both surrounded, and then they're going to start squeezing in from the outside, just like an anaconda would. It has nothing to do, it's named after the snake for that, but their strategy is not going to be to just dump a bunch of snakes in there on them, which would work if I were fighting, because I'm incredibly scared of snakes. But that's not, it didn't involve actual snakes. It's just based on how anacondas killed their prey. It talks about in the book, there were a lot of families that, a son would turn, in today's day it would be 18, but back then it would be 16 or 15, old enough back then to be considered an adult, move out of the house and go get a farming job somewhere down south. And it turns out that he joined the army, and his, the very first part of the chapter you read yesterday talks about a guy that unknowingly shot his own son. And so Abraham Lincoln's wife had family that fought for the Confederacy. John Crittenden, a famous senator from Kentucky, he had sons that were generals on opposing armies. And so, you had a lot of people that were before that were friendly that are now literally shooting at each other. And so you also had soldiers in the army that are like your age, which is not what you're looking for. I know that you guys might, I'm great at staying out of the gulag or whatever. You're great at Warzone, but actual real war is not that fun, despite what your PlayStation or Xbox might tell you. And so, they didn't have PlayStation or Xbox. And so a lot of these people were like 14 or 15 years old, and they were just like looking for something to do. And so they joined the army, and they regretted it pretty quickly because day-to-day life of a soldier in the middle of a war, especially in the War of 1865, 1861 is when it started. 1865 is not a pleasant experience. Last slide. African Americans could not fight in either army to start, which makes sense in the South because the whole thing they're fighting for is to be able to keep those human beings as slaves. And so handing them guns and be like, hey, here's a gun, go fight for me so I can keep you as a slave doesn't really make sense at all. But what doesn't make sense is why the North wouldn't let people of color fight in the beginning. You would think that would be one of their main sources of troops, because these people, like we talked about, are the angriest. They're the ones who have the most to gain by winning. They have their literal life and freedom to gain. And so you would think that the North would want these people of color to fight for them. But in the beginning, they didn't. As the war went on, they were like, hey, this is something that we need. And you can read about, and we'll read about later on, there were several African-American regiments that were incredible fighting forces in the Northern Army. And it's a shame that they didn't let them fight before. The reasoning was they felt that, there's some white troops would resent them because Northern troops were racist also. And they were right. When it happened, that was the case. But still, whenever you have a group of people that are wanting to fight for their literal life and freedom, letting them do so is probably advantageous. Each side expected the war to be quickly over. It wasn't, of course. It lasted from 1861 to 1865. So both sides suffers terrible losses. We're going to get into that as we go on this chapter. Here is your attendance question for today. What are you eating or going to eat for lunch today? There's a Google form attached to your classroom work. Answer that way so I can see your email addresses and count you here. And it doesn't matter if it's actually true. I just need to know that you've been watching this video and paying attention. So if you're like, I don't know what I'm going to eat for lunch, then you can just put that. It's fine. Your answers are not public. And you can just say I ate a cheeseburger. What the answer is doesn't matter at all. It's just if you watch the video and are able to answer the question in a way that makes sense. And so if you feel like lying to me about what you ate for lunch, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me anyway. So make sure when you go out of your house, you got your mask on, even if it looks like a bird beak. Keep washing your hands. Keep checking Google Classroom. There are a few of you that are behind, but most 8th grade specifically It's doing a good job catching up. So if there's anything that you need, feel free to email or message me on Classroom or Remind. But if not, have a great rest of the day, and I will talk to you tomorrow, and you'll probably see me again on Thursday. Okay, bye bye.